You are listening to the For Flourishing's Sake podcast by Frederica Roberts. Welcome to episode 53. This is the penultimate of the extended podcast episodes where you have had the opportunity to listen to the replays of the For Flourishing's Sake book launch events. Today, I bring you the first half of the fourth and final panel discussion of the Book Launch Extravaganza. This panel was recorded live on the 21st of August, the day the paperback edition of For Flourishing's Sake was published. You can also watch all the video replays on the Book Launch Extravaganza page at forflourishingsake.com. The final panel was chaired by Andrew Cowley, author of the Wellbeing Toolkit and of the beautiful Foreword to my book. The panellists alongside me were Paul Bateson, who is a teacher, writer and PGCE tutor at Huddersfield University in the UK, Julie Goldstein, who's the principal at Hartford Magnet Trinity College Academy in the USA, and Dan Morrow, who's the CEO of the Woodland Academy Trust in the UK, or he was at the time anyway. He's just started a new job, I believe. In this final book launch panel discussion, just as schools in the UK and the US were about to reopen for a new academic year in the midst of a pandemic, we pondered how important positive education is, more than ever in fact. In this first half of the discussion, we shared all of our definitions of positive education, discussed whether educating for character and well-being are the same thing, and whether they come at the expense of academic progress. Finally, we shared our thoughts on and examples of whether positive education works anywhere in any setting with any age group. You can, of course, watch back all the panel video recordings at forflourishingsake.com on the Book Launch Extravaganza page or on the Happiness Speaker YouTube channel as well. Good morning, good afternoon, hello everybody, wherever you are in the world, whatever time it is, welcome to the final of the 4 book launch live panels on the For Flourishing's Sake book launch extravaganza. And today's is so exciting because it is the day that the paperback has finally come out. So it's here in physical format, available for everybody to get their hands on. I'm beyond excited to be with you here today, and I have a fantastic panel of educators who will be introduced to you shortly. And I also have the wonderful Andrew Cowley with us here today, who's the author of the Wellbeing Toolkit and the writer of the Foreword to For Flourishing's Sake. And he's very kindly agreed to chair today's panel so that when we start, I can just relax and take part in the panel as a panelist rather than have to chair as well. So thank you very much. So I am Frederica Roberts. I'm the author of For Flourishing's Sake. And when I'm not writing, I am speaking, training, and also occasionally lecturing at postgraduate level on positive education and character education. Before that, I was a teacher. So many years ago, before I changed careers, I was a teacher, and I'm absolutely passionate about making sure that well-being is at the heart of education so that we can have education communities that truly support the flourishing of children and everybody in those communities, hence the book For Flourishing's Sake. How can you bring positive education and well-being and character development into schools? And that's what the panelists are here to discuss with me today, and how they've done their amazing work in their respective settings. So For Flourishing's Sake is published today, and it's available from all the major retailers of books all over the world. So get your copy today. Just search for Flourishing's Sake. So I'll hand over now to Andrew to chair this panel and enjoy. Hope you find it useful, and I'll have a quick word with you at the end again. But other than that, I'll relax as a panelist and take part. Thank you. Over to you, Andrew.
Very much, Fred, and good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to one of our panelists. Julie has joined us from Hartford Magnet Trinity College in Connecticut in the USA, and it's breakfast time over there, so I hope you have had some breakfast, Julie. We're glad you've joined us. We're expecting Paul Bateson. He's got 1 or 2 issues with his tech, I think. But when Paul joins us, Paul is from University of Huddersfield, and he's a teacher, writer, and PGCE tutor. And we also have Dan Morrow. Dan and I know each other from our workplaces, and Dan is currently CEO of the Woodlands Academy Trust. but we'll be moving on to ventures new fairly soon. So, for Flourishing's sake, when Fred contacted me about this, would I be interested in writing the foreword? It was 2019. No one had heard of social distancing. No one had heard of COVID. Things have changed rather. So, first question is, how are we? Julie, how are you?
Great question. If you ask, it's kind of like the weather in New England. It changes all through the day. But we're just about to open up school, and it's a combination of logistics and looking at how we're going to be infusing positive education within a virtual and hopefully throughout the year in-person school.
That's great. Paul, you're with us. How are you?
Hi, yeah, I've finally arrived. Sorry about that. Yeah, good, thank you. Yeah, glad to kind of be here. I thought I was going to have to duck out then for a second, but I managed to figure it all out.
Excellent. Dan, how about you? How are you doing?
Very well. I'm actually down in Dartmoor, which is the trust I will be leading from January. I've realised this is one of the most beautiful areas in the country, and also very, very wet. But that's all good. Like Julie, we're very much thinking about the reopening of schools and how we ensure that positive education is embedded in the processes, systems, and structures. But obviously, during this pandemic and COVID, having actually positive education embedded in culture has probably without doubt been one of the huge benefits of how we've been able to operate as a team.
That's fantastic to hear. And Fred, how are you? Excited?
I am very excited. Yes, it's been a long time coming today, and actually delayed because of the pandemic. It was supposed to come out as a paperback today in June, along with the Kindle. So very excited. But a bit like everybody else, there's a lot going on in education at the moment, and I think, although it's been really disruptive and really heartbreaking in so many ways, I'm actually also quite excited about what this pandemic could do for education, because what it's done is it's forced us a little bit to look at what we're doing in our practices, and it's, I think, opened up more eyes to the importance of well-being for everybody in education. So, and not just education, of course. So I hope that this can act as a catalyst for change.
Fantastic. Right. Well, we've got a number of questions. We've been hinting at some of those in our introductions. So first question, it's quite broad. What do you understand by positive education? Paul, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's a lovely phrase, isn't it? And throughout the book, it's kind of, there's perhaps different examples, and it's kind of defined in different ways. But I guess I've always defined what I do as child-centered. That's for me, that's positive, where positive education starts from. And I think it also is quite well summed up when you look at the timetable there, and you've got the different subjects that are all boxed off in a secondary school. Certainly, for me, like positive education's the things that aren't there in the timetable, the kind of the cracks in the boxes, if you like.
Fantastic, thanks. Okay, Julie, how about positive education your side of the Atlantic? Is it different from what we view it in the UK, or are we singing from the same hymn sheet?
Well, it's really, for me, rooted in the positive, like positive emotions, engagement, relationship, meaning, and accomplishment, and health. And it's needs to come across in our practices, how we take care of ourselves as adults, how that then gets transferred over to students through our own role modeling, and also through explicit instruction within the day. And that's why everyone needs to get this book, because there's ways that you can see how people may be doing it, doing positive education and taking it to another level. So I'm happy.
That's great. And your students are up to the age of 18. Am I right in thinking that?
Yes, I'm in a grade 6 to 12 school now. And when I met Fred, I was in a pre-K to 8 character education themed school. So it does look different across the ages, but it's I'll let everybody else talk and get more specifics in another question.
Okay, Dan, being in charge of a number of schools, how's positive education looking for you and your colleagues? I think it goes back to Julie's point, actually, about the model that Fred proposes in the book around LEAF, the Learn and Flourish. I particularly like the idea of that double helix, the idea that positive education is actually about the holistic approach of bringing the academics with the well-being and character without discerning some kind of hierarchy between the two, but actually seeing them as both symbiotic and synergistic with the goals of an overall holistically positive education for our children. And I think, as you know, Andrew, for the work we do together in our local authority and more generally, we do discreetly teach character education, and we also look to the culture of positive education. And I think it is that mixture of tangible and intangible. But equally, I would suggest that in those most testing times that we faced recently, it's where the benefits have really shown in terms of care, resilience, compassion, and an approach which is not based on judgment, but is based on trying to both liberate and really, as Fred would say, help everyone to flourish within the circumstances we find ourselves in. Thank you. Okay, now Fred, you wrote the book. What's positive education all about?
Oh, now if I just said I don't know, that would be an interesting one, wouldn't it? Well, like everybody said, there's all the elements are there, really. I mean, Dan referred to the double helix, and that's the double helix that IPEN, the International Positive Education Network, use. And I really like that as an overall kind of framework to explain what it is, because that double helix is on one hand academic education, and on the other hand it's well-being and character strengths development. And it's really when you put all of that together that you get that holistic approach that everybody here has talked about. Nobody here would say that well-being is the sole purpose of education and that we should forget about academic stuff. It's about how the two feed off each other. And actually, if you want people to flourish overall, which includes academically, not just while they're at school, but also when they leave school, and if you want the entire school community to flourish, then it's about putting those puzzle pieces together. And there's so much research that supports that if you look after the well-being side of things and the character development, then the academic success actually follows anyway. So it makes absolute sense, even from that point of view, to support well-being. So that's where I see positive education, and I really see it as a bit of a shift in how we educate. It needs to be explicit, it needs to be implicit, it needs to be modelled, it needs to be through the academic subjects. And what I really hope is that one day it's no longer a distinction between saying positive education, character education, well-being in education, but that we just talk about education and it includes all of these things.
Yeah, some very pertinent points there, and the sort of key things that have come out from that first round of questioning is relationships, health, care, resilience, positivity, and holistic nature of everything. Julie held up your LEAF model, which is a very powerful model there, Fred, of the holistic nature of what education should be. Right, so on to the next question, which partly started addressing this already. So are educating for character and educating for well-being one and the same, or are they different? And should it be at the expense of academic progress or not? Dan, do you want to start us off on that one?
Well, yes, just the first thing I want to do is challenge your question.
Yeah.
Because it's a false dichotomy to suggest that by promoting a holistic model, that would be at the expense of academic progress. And I think that kind of hierarchy is perhaps one of the reasons why we often talk in quite a binary, as if they are either or. And actually, I think it's very, very clear it is an and that. For me, the difference between character and well-being is actually about lexicon, language, and how we potentially approach that culturally, both in perhaps the United States, Britain, and other Western countries, where they're seen as perhaps interchangeable terms, so the way that positive education and character education can be as well. But there are some nuances and distinction underneath. What I believe very strongly is that well-being is about a state of mind and a state of existence, and therefore about someone's ability to represent their present. And character is about ensuring that we are in a growth mindset, looking at some of those traits, habits, behaviors, and expectations that lead us to be self-actualizing and therefore flourishing. And therefore, they have to be seen as both parallel and, in fact, intersecting lines of approaches, because you can have very, very, very successful pupils academically whose well-being is in a terrible, terrible place. Equally, you can have some people who have excellent well-being whose academics is not therefore supporting that well-being and character actually to be effective and sustaining in the long term. So again, I do come back to that double helix. I don't think we can divorce two concepts which are clearly linked. And just very briefly, I would suggest that in our discrete lessons around character, and then in our approach using well-being coaches, and therefore the academic approach, they're almost like three sides of a triangle, and they need to be held always in both tension but also supportive tension with each other in order to ensure the child or the family, or indeed the staff member who's at the centre of the triangle, is therefore always at that centre and isn't outsided by some kind of reductive accountability or some need to put a tick in the box.
Yeah. Thank you, Dan. I know you're really passionate about this from what I know of you and Bexley. Julie.
That is definitely a loaded question. And let's see, what can I add to that? I think that, first of all, absolutely well-being and positive character development in the areas that were just described are essential for positive school culture and also for academics. And an example in school of how it might be different is, we start our day at HMTCA, that's the acronym for our school, and at Breakthrough also in the morning with a mindful moment. A lot of schools have started to do that. And so that would be an example of how to promote well-being, being present, intentional awareness. And then character is, I think, reflected through our intentions and developing our skills. And that's when we're put to the test in the activities that we do. I think that character in that kind of cliche description of, thoughts, actions, habits, then develop into our character. That negative or poor character can sometimes be a reflection of cumulative negative behavior that may be done as a result of some shortcomings that people don't know how to resolve. So in schools, it's the perfect place to get the foundation set through both well-being and character development.
Fred, I turn to you for that one. What do you think? Separation of character and well-being, or are they natural bedfellows?
I think they're definitely natural bedfellows and definitely support the academic achievement rather than undermine it in any way. I actually look at it from a positive psychology perspective, and actually character development and character strengths form one of the big building blocks of positive psychology and how we look after our well-being. So there's research that supports that both generally working on your character strengths, knowing what they are, knowing how to recognize them, knowing how to develop them in oneself, and also spotting them in others can enhance well-being, but also there are certain character strengths that particularly support well-being. So strengths like hope, for example, gratitude are some of the ones that are particularly associated with supporting well-being. So developing those in an educational context is really important. So I see almost character development as an element of a bigger picture of positive education, and that all sits within the context of positive education as a whole school endeavor, which then brings in all of these other other things which are also character strengths, for example, like leadership as well. So it all fits together in lots of different and complex ways. And I think if you take one of the elements out, as Dan was referring to that triangle, you start seeing that something starts to give and something starts to get a little bit wonky. So you really need all three. You need the academic, you need the character, you need the well-being aspect. And once you put all of that in place, then it really, they all nourish each other and they all feed off each other and support flourishing in all aspects.
Okay. And then finally, if I turn to Paul there, now Paul is as a PGCE tutor, how do you emphasise character and well-being for your potential future teachers?
I mean, firstly, I agree with what all the other speakers have said, that they really are intertwined. And, it's very interesting, isn't it? The kind of, as you said, the loaded question about it, is it at the expense of academic progress? And I'd say definitely not. For me, well-being's about being happy and healthy in order for you to explore your character, which for me, you could read the word values in the place of character. But, as Fred said, character and having strong values will undoubtedly enable you to be well and happy and healthy. So there is a bit of a chicken and egg element to the question. Going back to my kind of timetable analogy earlier, there's no reason why maths lessons and science lessons should not be including elements of character and of values and of well-being in those lessons. And that's what we kind of teach on the PGCE at Huddersfield. Yes, we're on a secondary, I'm teaching on the secondary PGCE. So we're all subject specialists, but, we've all got a duty and we've all got an obligation to weave these things into our own curriculums. It's not at the expense. And people look at that curriculum and say, "Oh, there's no time for a discrete session on character," for example. And I would say there is, and I know there's plenty of schools out there that are doing that. But even if there isn't, it comes in your own subject. It should be planned in to your own subject as well.
Thank you, Paul. Right. So, challenging question. Let's try this one. Will positive education work anywhere and in any setting with any age group children? Fred, would you like to start us off here?
Put me on the spot, why don't you? Yes, the answer is yes. What I really set out to do in the book was to show exactly that. And that's why I was really keen when I interviewed contributors to the book to speak to people from different schools. So whether it was independent schools, whether it was state-funded schools, whether it was primary, secondary. I even interviewed somebody who's implemented positive education in higher education settings and in different countries all over the world, because I really wanted to show that this is not something that only happens in certain types of schools. I think sometimes positive education has been seen as being something that only happens in high-end independent schools, and that's really where it started. If you look at Geelong Grammar School in Australia, if you look at it's gone Wellington College, that's it, over here in the UK. Those are the schools that have been associated with the start of what's known as positive education now. But really, what I wanted to show is that this has been happening all over the world in lots of different types of schools, and quite often schools with very small budgets as well. So it's not something that's only available to people in fee-paying schools or in certain countries. What we do need to do, and that's one of the elements of the LEAF model that's been shown by the research to be really important, is to adapt what we do to the cultural environment. And that's the cultural environment in a specific country, for example, but also each school, each educational setting has its own microculture. So you can't just take something that works in one school and transpose it into another and expect it to work exactly the same way. You have to take the cultural environment into account and you have to adapt what you do. So in that context, as long as you do that, then yes, it can and will work anywhere.
It does, and indeed, for people who are going to buy the book and invest in it, we go from Geelong High School, we go to Wellington College, we dip down into our corner of southeast London as well. as well as one or two other locations. So a very, very diverse range of schools being covered in the book. Okay, Paul, how about you? Will positive education work anywhere?
I think so. In my experience, I've seen it work. I work in a primary school regularly, and we've been working to do what I just talked about in terms of weaving these values through the regular curriculum. And the response has been brilliant. I've seen the same at secondary school with projects that I've run, and I talked about the kind of angle that we take at teacher training level as well. I think I'd agree with what Fred said, though. There's got to be some context, because not all schools need the same, and not all students need the same. So a project that I run at a school, for example, was in response to a certain issue. I felt like we needed to teach kindness to these children, and at another school that might not be something that's at the top of the list, so that the project or the kind of focus might be different, but absolutely it can work across the board.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, let's head over to Julie. Now, Julie, what do you think positive education can work anywhere?
Oh, I know that it can, and I guess the thing that's interesting in my personal experience is that I was fortunate enough to join a school founded by a teacher who, that was her complete intention in creating Breakthrough Magnet School, was in developing a school that promoted positive character development before positive education had a name. And by creating the mission and the vision and the values and promoting those explicitly and implicitly, I've seen it for myself, and I've seen how it can work. And actually the cumulative effect, starting from a 3-year-old, and as they get up in years, what that looks like and how that lands. And now I'm in a grade 6 to 12 school where it was not necessarily intentionally or as self-aware in its creation as a school, and we're going to make it more self-aware. And so I think any educator or school leader, the positive education elements are already present in your school, in your mission and your vision, in everybody's why. And this book, especially that Fred put together, by the way, I do love that you get to travel around the world in the book through the different schools, is really neat. But you can see how to make what you're doing intentional so that you can get actual results. And that's something that I focus a lot on, is setting a goal for well-being that we measure through a Likert scale that we then can tweak more intentionally as a result of having those things in place. So I know it works. And it's something that I'm also excited to see continue and expand globally. Thanks to Fred and this great book. You really have to get it. It's a great roadmap.
Thank you, Julie. Okay, and finally I'll turn to Dan. Now, Dan, I know that you've got a background in children from EYFS 2 right through to secondary. Do you think it can work anywhere?
Absolutely, and really want to echo what Julie just said, firstly about the book, but also I've seen it and I know it can. I mean, what I find really interesting is, if you really think about positive education, that's what the early years experience for our children and the curriculum is all about. It's about not trying to silo those aspects of character, well-being and academics as we look to the holistic child. One of the difficulties in the British education system as we go through it is that we can sometimes then see a hierarchy of academics overtaking that sort of character well-being. To reference what Fred said at the beginning, it does feel that some of the independent sector understood that first. And we probably in the last 5 to 10 years have been in a bit of a paradigm in the UK where positive education was almost for the privileged few. And actually our model was suggesting the majority just needed to be academic as the way out. And I think that sort of reductive thinking is now being challenged when we see that without that focus on the double helix and the sense that well-being and academic health is inextricably linked, We do not get to the point where we see children who go on to flourish outside of settings where that isn't the case. And a good example is, if we take just an academic approach, say, for example, at high school, then we see dropout rates, huge dropout rates at university, because we haven't given the character and well-being for those children to succeed in the long term. And therefore, for me, yes, it can and will succeed everywhere when it has the culture to support it, because actually that is what a genuine depth of education looks like. And it's also what serving our moral and vocational purpose is all about.
Thank you for listening to the For Flourishing's Sake podcast. If you have found this episode useful or interesting, please give it a 5-star rating on iTunes to help it reach more people, and please spread the word. Also, if you haven't already, remember to subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. For Flourishing's Sake is available on all the major podcasting platforms. The book is available from all major online book retailers in most countries. It's jam-packed with evidence-based strategies for whole school positive education, with case study examples from a wide range of schools from around the world. Have you got your copy yet? If you'd like to get in touch with questions or comments, or to contribute to a future podcast episode, please contact me via Twitter at FlourishingEd. You can also leave comments on individual episode pages on the forflourishingsake.com website, of course. I look forward to hearing from you, and until next time, for flourishing's sake, have a great week.